Good afternoon. I'm Leanne Case. I am the AVP for Finance and Administration at Eastern. I am here to present the tuition proposal for 23-24 through the ASEOU Student Forum. Throughout the evening, I will share with you some updates on the E&G current budget, the FY24 budget overview for next year with enrollment projections, a state funding outlook, current expenditures and assumptions, and some changes that have been made from the prior year, as well as how we would look at closing the gap on our revenue and expenditures, as well as the draft tuition proposal and then next steps that we will take going forward. The E&G FY23 final budget looks like this. As of right now, we are very close to forecasting the end of the year with a net operating use of our fund balance of $2.2 million. We are very close to our budget. Revenues are coming in as expected and expenditures are going out as expected. There could be some small changes, but we are entering into the fourth quarter of the year, and those changes or updates and forecasts will be provided to EOU's Budget and Planning Tuition Advisory Committee at each of the next meetings. As of January 31st, our current budget, we had received 72% of our budgeted revenue and spent or uncovered 95% of our labor expenses, as well as spent 53% of our direct expenditures. So you can see there we are on target to end the year as projected with the budget. Throughout the last 5 years, we have made significant investments in new programs, people, technology, campus facilities, upgrades to classrooms, upgrades to technology. We're now at a juncture where those investments must begin to pay off with increasing our enrollments. The entire campus must execute on enrollment. That's everywhere from recruitment to retention, student activities, revitalization of the campus facilities, all around. Everyone has to participate in increasing our enrollment over the next 5 years. The changes to state funding model didn't positively benefit us, so we're climbing an uphill battle with our state funding. Therefore, enrollment and tuition are our only other two levers to pull for revenue increases, so they are very important to us going forward. In our regular budget, expenditures increase 4 to 6% annually. We have tried to minimize that over the last few years, coming in at 2 to 3% annually. Going forward into FY24, we should be able to stabilize in that 3% range as well. Just in a recap of our investments that we have been making, technology, software, classrooms, campus grounds, increases in fee remissions, facilities, academic equipment, faculty, additional faculty, staff support, new academic programs or revitalization of current programs, increasing our marketing tools. These investments have been made even with increases in inflation, which have driven up the cost of our expenses, and with declining enrollments. The FY24 budget overview. Currently, a budget estimate, our revenue estimates look like this. Our state allocations at $24,556,000. Tuition without increases in enrollment or tuition increases, $25.4 million. And other fees, other revenue that we receive of $2.8 million, and fee remissions that we would reinvest into our students of $3.2 million for a total revenue package of $49.5 million. The state allocations are built on the DAS current service level. Our funding from the state is unknown at this time, so it's just a point of reference that we can use building our budgets going forward and for our tuition setting process. The state funding outlook, this is just the revenue we receive through the Public University Support Fund. And these are all of the different numbers that get used. The GRB is the governor's recommended budget. Through her recommended budget, it's $933 million. The DAS CSL brings us up to $972 million. And we're using the $972 million that goes into all the public universities. Eastern's share of that would be $23 million in FY24. In addition to that, the governor's budget also provided $15 million funding for technical and regional public universities to fund operational support. That is not a known at this time. It was just noted in the governor's recommended budget that she put forward. Expenditure budget changes for FY24. I will see about $1 million increase in labor. 400 of that is in fringe or other public or other personnel expenses. An increase of $1.2 million in our revenue share. That's if we have tuition and enrollment increases. If there's no tuition or enrollment increases, that doesn't happen. We have a match amount on the Inlow Hall project of $130,000. For previous budget presentations, that amount was about $560,000. We're able to smooth that out over a couple of fiscal years, so that amount has decreased. We've also removed the LoSo Hall match completely from the budget. That was a pretty significant amount of $800,000, and that will be moved out to FY26 based on the current capital plan. Looking at inflationary and compliance increases of $374,000, enrollment-driven increases of $118,000. There's $2 million built into the budget of the temporary savings, vacancy savings that we should see over the course of the year, and $105,000 in permanent savings that have been captured through the budget process. This budget that you will see does not include new requests that the Budget and Planning Tuition Advisory Committee are currently contemplating for next year. The larger change from FY23, this current year, we had built in a $1.2 million of additional savings from offsetting of grants. That has not been built into the future budget based on what our grant funds will look like going into next year. Looking at our expenses by the dollars, this is what it would look like. Our total budget for labor would be $27 million. Fringe and OPE, another $15.5 million. Service and supplies, travel, contracts, all of those things add up to about $13 million. Capital funds, not capital that we use necessarily for buildings, but capital improvements, operational around the campus, $552,000. Internal reimbursements are a reduction of $970, and then net transfers in of $112, bringing our total expenditure budget up to $54.9 million, almost $55 million. Again, this particular budget here is without enrollment increases, so it doesn't include the additional contract amount that we have. How do we close the budget gap? The budget gap is the difference between revenue and expenditures and what we would have to use of our fund balance going into the next year. The current trend of burning our fund balance off at between $1.5 and $2.2 million is not sustainable. And we work closely with the campus, with budget and planning, with enrollment management, looking at enrollment initiatives, finding efficiencies, reducing expenditures, finding additional revenue streams such as grants, to close that gap. All of those things combined are what are needed to be able to close the gap and bring us into a budget that, while not balanced, will see us through the next year, and hopefully through retention and enrollment increases, we'll be able to get on the other side of that deficit in the next few years. This current scenario has us using $3.5 million. We need to reduce that $3.5 million down. But it also includes $2 million in the annual savings. So before we start to do anything, tuition increases, enrollment increases, any of that, we have a $3.5 million deficit to our budget going into FY24. How do we close the gap? We can use fund balance. Like I said, the $3.5 million, that's not sustainable. It's like using your savings account up. Eventually it's gone. We can invest in more alternative revenue streams, such as additional grants to support the campus. We can look at operating budget expenditures, reductions, efficiencies, all of those areas, enrollment increases and tuition increases. As you can see, there's not a lot of levers to pull, but it takes all of them to balance the budget or to bring the budget into an area that is sustainable for the future. We do have a fund balance policy, board statement number 11. Our fund balance requirement or goal level is to be between 20 and 25%. We are currently not at 25% with the 3.5 million. It would bring us down to a 10.8% of our revenue. That's not sustainable. We probably won't be even at the 20% going into FY24, even after we have tuition increases and enrollment increases, and that requires a conversation with the board, and so we'll have a little bit of an uphill battle there as well. Use of fund balance, the pros and cons. Each of the items that I listed out of closing the gap, I've also provided pros and cons going forward. So the pros of using our fund balance, it decreases the dependency on revenue increases and tuition increases. It reduces the need for budget reductions. It's easy. We just burn off some more fund balance, use a little bit more savings going forward. The cons list is much larger. It doesn't meet the board goals. It negatively impacts the future of the institution. It can create pressures on future tuition increases. It reduces the flexibility, fiscal flexibility. It can impact our financial statements and our ratios. It also can impact our accreditation. So it's not a prudent way to go forward to just continue to use the fund balance. It really has to be a balanced effort between all of the levers that we have. You can also look at alternative revenue, continue to increase alternative revenue streams. Grant revenue is one of those. We currently are using grants to offset expenses from our Title III grant, which is a retention grant, our Strong Start grants, our rural, rural grant, our Future Readies grant, and our Oregon Teachers Pathways grant. We have many more grants. Those are just the high dollar ones, high profile ones that we've been able to use to offset expenditures for this current year. Pros and cons of using alternative revenue streams. Again, it reduces the dependency on other revenue increases. It increases opportunities for other revenue streams. Sometimes when you get one grant, you can get other grants along with those. And it's a metric of our ascent goals. So those are all the pros. Cons, it's temporary. It's one-time funding usually, maybe spread over several years, but it is temporary. It's not built into our permanent budget. Some other type of revenue stream has to come in at some point to fill that gap. There's an increased workload a lot of times when we have alternative revenue streams such as grants, when there's additional criteria that comes along with those and outcomes that we have to focus on. It's also a reliance on uncertain funding because grant funding isn't guaranteed from year to year. Expenditure and reductions and efficiency in the budget process for FY24, in lieu of asking for across-the-board reductions, we asked departments to think strategically about what they needed to execute on their goals, primarily in terms of enrollment. We also asked them to find efficiencies and to find places where they could reduce costs, where we could reduce costs as an institution. Some of that you saw in the $104,000 in permanent savings, so that was a small chunk, but it was departments going in and determining that they could give back some of their budget going into next year. The pros, it slows the pressure on the expenditure budget. So if you reduce your expenses, you're not growing at such a rapid rate. It also reduces the dependency on other revenue increases. It can negatively impact the student's educational experience if we begin reducing expenditures, reducing programs, reducing activities, reducing class sizes, all of those things, increasing class sizes, all of those things, that impacts the student's experience. It can negatively impact employee morale and workforce. If we have to reduce the number of people, the work is usually still here. Less people have to do more work going into the next year. Morale drops, people leave, people don't come back, we can't fill vacancies. It also negatively impacts future enrollment growth because we just don't have the activities on campus, we don't have the appropriate class sizes, we don't have as strong of services and operations around the campus. We can look at enrollment increases. The campus community has dedicated efforts to improve enrollment at Eastern. Initiatives include retention, curriculum redesign, review of equity issues, additional recruitment efforts, marketing impacts, improving the pipeline for high school students, and continuing to the revitalization of the campus post-pandemic. Currently, we're estimating that enrollment increases for next year would generate about $2.3 million in additional tuition. That's good news. Our current projection for next year is about a 7.5% increase over the 22-23 projections. And a decrease, it's actually a decrease of 120 credit hours, which is 2 students on campus, an increase in graduate SCH of 923, off campus of 6281, and high school students of 79. Our on-campus population is continuing to grow. Some of that is switching from our on-campus to off-campus just from the pandemic. Some of it is convenience of being able to stay at home. Some of it is additional recruitment efforts. Stabilizing our on-campus population is another priority. Campus needs to be vital. It needs to be vibrant. Students do that, and that's where we would like to invest more, is in our on-campus. The high school students is a small population, but with some of our grant work, we're expecting that number to grow. It's not a big number in size when they're in high school, but it is a pipeline into enrollment going forward. So it is critical. It helps in every way. Again, it's pulling all the levers and balancing everything out going forward. These are just projections. We're continuing to refine these as we go forward, and admissions and ROI both provide numbers as far as what applications look like and what the yield will be for fall based on their trends from prior years. The pros of enrollment increases: it reduces the dependency on tuition increases. It improves the student experience, more students, more fun. It can be the right balance can reduce the impact on potential budget reductions. The cons: there can be increased costs with enrollment increases in instructional costs, support staff, operations. It can impact class sizes, and it can impact space utilization. Tuition increases, the final lever we like to pull. We have continued our efforts with the legislature to fund additional state support. We've continued to invest in programs at Eastern to bolster enrollment. We've continued to seek alternative revenue streams through grants or other sources. Tuition increases always have been and always will be the last resort in the budget process. It's the last thing we look at. It's the last thing that we want to do. Pros with tuition increases: you really wouldn't think there would be any, but does slow the pressure on the expenditure budget. It reduces dependency on one-time funding, and it allows the university to continue to operate with current service levels. The cons: it can negatively impact the student's educational experience. It can work against the desire to remain the lowest cost for Oregon Public Universities, and it can negatively impact the future enrollment growth. The draft tuition proposal for 23-24, the Budget and Planning Tuition Advisory Committee reaffirmed their goals and values to maintain the best value position relative to other Oregon public universities, to build and maintain financial stabilities to allow for consistent improvement in mission fulfillment, and to continue to serve the regional access by assuring affordability to those most in need. In looking at the guiding principles from budget and planning and balancing that against the need for revenue and a more balanced budget is always a challenge. To do that, I reviewed various tuition rates for the Oregon Public Universities and where we are in relation to them. Compared an analysis provided by Wiley Educational Services for off-campus tuition comparisons, took into account points made by student leadership, considered all state funding scenarios, considered net tuition impacts and the impacts of financial aid, refined the expenditure budget, and refined enrollment projections. So all of these things are in play. They've all been discussed with the Tuition Advisory Committee, Budget and Planning. The student leadership has seen one presentation earlier in the year. Students serve on the Tuition Advisory Committee, Budget and Planning. So balancing is key. The draft tuition proposal would be a 4.9 increase for resident on campus, a 3.5% increase for non-resident on campus, a 3% increase for resident off campus, a 3% increase for resident non-resident off campus, 2% increase in graduate tuition, no increase for undergraduate or graduate business differentials, and no increase for dual credit or high school students. Projected revenue based on this draft proposal would be $873,000. The proposal by the numbers had a 4.9% increase. It's a $9 for on-campus resident students. It's a $9 per credit hour rate increase, bringing the SCH rate to $191.50. Annual based on a 45 credit hour, it's $405 more per year. Off-campus, off-campus resident students would see $8.40 increase per credit hour, bringing their rates up to $286.40. Their annual rates are a little bit lower. They don't all take 45 credits per year, so their annual rate is projected to be about $252. We know that our students blend classes, modalities on campus and off campus, so your actual rate is going to be somewhere in between all of these based on what type of a student you are, where you're from, and what modality of class that you take. The graduate residents and non-resident pay the same rates. They're all considered online. Their SCH would go up to $520.80 per credit hour going into next year. This is just an incremental look. If you look at 1 to 4.9% across the board for all modalities, what it would look like per rate, and then also what the increase would be. The red denotes the actual increases that are in the proposal. Looking at various loads and the total revenue increase from the increase, the top boxes are the annual increase. What students could see annually taking 45 credit hours or 36 credit hours, depending on what modality you are, and also the total revenue that would be generated from each of those buckets and each of those tuition rates. Again, the red is what corresponds with the actual proposal. The total budget overview based on 3 different scenarios. With the first column is no tuition increase and no enrollment increase. Again, our revenue would be $49.5 million. Expenditures are almost $55 million. $2 million in temporary savings, and then that leaves us with that $3.4 million in net operating loss, which impacts our fund balance, bringing our fund balance down to the 14.8. And the second column is if we went with a tuition proposal that applies 4.9% increase to all categories, the revenue goes up to $52.7 million. Expenditures also go up because there are expenditures that go along when enrollment and tuition goes up, so it'd be $56 million. Again, the $2 million in temporary savings. Our net operating would be 1.4 negative at the end of the year. And the final column is the suggested proposed increases: $52 million generated in revenue, $56 million in expenditures, $2 million in temporary savings, and a $2.2 million use of fund balance at the end of the year, bringing us to 16.4% at the end of the year, or 1.82 months of operating. This does include an increase in enrollment of the $2.3 million in both the 4.9% category and the proposed increase. Next steps, we continue with our March engagement, meeting with ASEOU, our student and campus community forums, budget and planning, the tuition advisory committee, meeting with the EOU cabinet. In April, we'll do the similar meetings. Another forum is scheduled for the 12th of April Additional meetings with ASEOU as needed. Budget and planning continues to meet. The board Finance and Administration Committee will see the first read of the tuition proposal at their April meeting. And in May, a final proposal will go to Finance and Administration, the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees Committee will make a final recommendation at their May meeting. Questions?
Why is there a tuition proposal difference between the residential on campus and the residential off campus? Wouldn't you think they'd relatively be the same?
You'll probably have to, I don't think that that's working. I don't know. You'll probably have to come closer. Sorry.
Okay, there it goes, hopefully. Why is there a difference between the residential on campus and the residential off campus for tuition increases? Is it one 4.9 and the other 3.9? Wouldn't you relatively want to keep that the same?
As far as our percentage of on campus and off campus, why is it different? Our off-campus programs obviously pay more right now, so it's higher there. They also don't pay any fees, so that balances off some of the total costs. But what I did with the off-campus programs is more market-based. So Wiley Educational Services provided a full look at what the national market looked like, and then they drilled that down into a smaller market, and we're about in the middle of where that is and where that threshold is before we max ourselves out with a too high of a tuition rate. Does that make sense? Is that what you asked?
Thank you.
Thank you. The non-resident off-campus is new for Eastern. Last year was the first year that we had the non-resident off-campus rate, so we have those two rates as well. So if you're not an Oregon resident, you're paying the non-resident rate if you're taking off-campus classes, unless you were already matriculated when we put that into effect. So if you were already going to school, you are not paying a non-resident rate at this time. Yep. All right. Good. Thank you all. We'll see you on the 12th.